Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Whiskey and Wisdom podcast. I am Tyler Yaw, and this is my co-host, Chris Kellum. And we are actually recording today from the beautiful Hotel Ballast in downtown Wilmington. And we just want to do a quick shout out to Jenna. She was actually our bartender today at the Hotel Ballast and helped us out with some whiskey selections.
Yeah, that was ridiculous. Her knowledge on whiskey was way bigger than I expected, because I definitely wouldn't have thought about the whiskey we tried tonight.
Yeah, same thing here. When you think of hotel bars, you don't think of bartenders who are going to give you the best whiskey selection. But yeah, I was quite impressed too.
Oh, for sure.
And so for our first episode, we wanted to give you all of the genesis of how Whiskey and Wisdom was born, why I decided to start a podcast, and why I thought Chris would be a perfect co-host to start the show.
I mean, I'm still wondering why you thought that.
We'll find out.
But before we jump into like the big meat of the podcast, we're going to talk about our thing that we do at the beginning of every podcast. It's going to be called The First Sip. This is where we try out a new whiskey each week. And this week we're sipping on the Hibiki Harmony, which I had never seen in my life. But it's a Japanese whiskey, which is kind of nice. And they set up each of their bottles actually has 24 facets around it to represent the 24 hours of the day. And
that's
apparently, the Japanese celebrate 24 seasons of the year in their lunar calendar. So I guess it's based off like the new moon, full moon cycle.
Learn more here than just whiskey on Whiskey and Wisdom podcast.
That's what I'm trying to do. But I'd like to just do it. Cheers to rare occasions. Let's get it going.
Cheers.
So, I don't know many of you, but actually I probably don't know most of you. But me, myself, I've not been a traditional podcast person. I typically listen to random things about video games and sports. But I know, Tyler, you've been listening to podcasts for a minute.
Yeah, I was one of the OG podcast listeners back almost a decade ago at this point, before it was even popular. I got made fun of for many years for the whole podcasting thing before everyone else jumped on the bandwagon.
So did you actually have an iPod?
I am not an iPod, Apple, anything guy. I was definitely all Android, but I found all of the weird kind of fringe podcast apps that I could get a hold of.
So since you didn't have Apple products, I'm sure you were listening to podcasts from all over the world. What was something that you listened to, like your first thing that pulled you in?
The very first podcast that I was listening to was actually Tim Ferriss. I read his 4-Hour Work Week, and when I saw that he had a podcast and the people he was talking to, it really kind of drug me in. It was actually very similar to everyone knows Joe Rogan right now and his type of podcast.
Oh, for sure.
But Tim Ferriss was actually one of the first guys who did the long form podcast, doing like 2-3 hours at a time.
I mean, I'd love to do a long form, but not here.
Yeah, I'm happy with 30 to 40 minutes. We'll stick with that for now. We'll see what you guys think about it.
Nice. I mean, since you were into Tim Ferriss, did that like do anything with your mentality and starting businesses, or where you went from listening to that, since that was, 2014?
Yeah, back when I was listening to Tim Ferriss was back when my early days of wanting to start my own business. And I actually started a company in Wilmington here with one of the women that you're actually going to hear from in a few weeks, Brittany Lineberry. And we started Firefly. And we started doing that because one of the things that Tim Ferriss always said was to create a company that scratches your own itch. And for Firefly, there was really no place to find out what events were going on in Wilmington. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how that started. And while doing that, there was a few things that happened along the way, and Firefly kind of petered out, and podcasting started kind of piquing my interest more too, and figured that podcasting was another way to scratch my own itch.
So when Firefly kind of went down, I'm assuming it happened around time COVID hit and people couldn't go out and do anything anyways. So before that happened, I know you're always one step ahead. You're not doing one thing at a time. What do you think brought you into thinking about doing your own podcast? Was it seeing people in the world, you listening to too many podcasts, or was it too many drinks?
All of the above. So my favorite thing about podcasting is just hearing different people's perspectives on life. But most importantly, the thing that I loved most about Firefly wasn't even really events. When I first started, I thought it was going to be just going to events, enjoying events, and just going to live music. But really what I enjoyed the most from Firefly was meeting these business owners and meeting their employees, hanging out with them. And a lot of the clients that we had and a lot of events that we went to was based around drinking, because most people drink when you go out to events, right?
Oh, for sure.
And so while doing that, and even the bar patrons that I met when I was going out was probably the most interesting part. And when I started thinking about how can I change what I'm doing now to get the best of just learning about the people around me and having these conversations all the time, I figured taking the love of podcasting and the love of meeting people while over having a good drink would be a perfect way to get this started.
Nice. And I mean, I love a good drink. Have you always been a whiskey person, or is that something new now that you're edging up on 30?
Yeah, getting close to 30 kind of helps with that.
I feel like everybody I know starts drinking whiskey right about 29.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I actually wasn't into alcohol for a long time, believe it or not. And one of my best friends, who will probably eventually zoom in with us on the podcast too, got me into drinking some different beers and stuff, and kind of showing me the light beyond just like Natty Light.
Oh my god!
Brings you back to the old
Light.
college days. And and Wilmington's the best place for just the beer scene in general. So that kind of got me started, and then I realized that there's not just different ways to make beers, but different ways to make whiskeys. So that kind of got me into the love of whiskey. And I know you're quite a bit of a whiskey drinker yourself.
I am a toddler in the whiskey world.
Aren't we all?
I think the thing I drank the most when I was single was sitting at the bar and just getting a Jameson and ginger.
Yeah,
and
that's a go-to.
I didn't realize that there were so many different. I was like, I'll just get a whiskey. And they just were like, oh, here, try this.
Whiskey is definitely one of those things. The more I got involved in it, the more I realized I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Like, what was it? When we were talking to Jenna earlier, I didn't realize that Front Street Brewery now has over 400.
Yeah, I learned that too when she was telling us. That's crazy that even just one bar in Wilmington would have that many whiskeys.
Especially when there's a brewery. Like when you're known for your beer and you have something else for everybody, that's always a good thing to do as well.
Can't forget about the whiskey flights that they have at Front Street too.
We got to do that this week.
I agree. That's done.
I'm so excited. So I'm assuming when you're thinking up a podcast and your personality, you're not really one for a solo dolo. So
right.
Were you just off the dome like, hey, I want to do a co-host, or were you just like playing around? Like, what made you think of it asking me out?
Yeah. When I was thinking podcasting, I've heard a lot of people doing just kind of like monologues for 30, 40 minutes, just kind of talking about what they want to talk about, life or whatever. And I really didn't see myself just sitting in front of a microphone, staring at a computer. You definitely wouldn't get my personality out of it, and I'm sure you wouldn't get much information out of that either. And so I started thinking about, who can I bring on to this? Because I want to talk about topics that aren't necessarily the easiest things to talk about.
Oh, and
for sure. I want to bring on people that are going to tell you about the ups and downs of their lives and kind of bring out the best of everyone, but also wanting to know the dark parts of where people came from. So I knew the best way to do that was to bring on a co-host. And when I was thinking, who should I bring on for this? Kellum was the first person I thought of.
Oh, well, thank you.
Absolutely. And the main reason why is the real time I was like, you know what, the podcast is starting is right when TikTok came out.
I remember that.
And so I eventually got Chris on the TikTok. And my favorite thing that started happening is, we talk all the time anyway. We always have we're talking on text and then Snapchat and Instagram. And then we had TikTok as well eventually. So we had like 4 conversations at once. And my favorite thing that you would do is you would send and you still do it now, is you send a TikTok and there's usually some kind of question involved in it. And if there's not, you have a question with it.
Oh, I'm always asking questions.
And that was the thing that kind of really inspired me to ask you first and foremost, is because those questions is what kind of brings you to another level and kind of get you to a new perspective. Mm-hmm. You'll never get out of the way that you're thinking now if you're not asking questions.
Oh, for sure. There's so many people that don't ask questions.
Exactly. And the people that I find myself kind of drifting away from now are the people that aren't being curious, because I'm always thinking of things. And the real reason why I wanted to start a podcast is I used to have people come up to me like, how did you get to where you got to when it comes to a opinion about something? And I'll literally sit there and I'll listen to what someone says, and then I'll argue with myself for the next 5 days and try to combat what I was thinking about myself. And so I always have that internal monologue of questions.
Oh, for sure.
But it just brings you to a new level when you're talking to someone else and hearing a question from someone else that you never thought of. So your questions always pushed me to think past what I was able to bring up. So you were just the automatic first choice for a podcast host.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's ridiculous. I ask so many questions myself, and my wife just hates it. She's like, why were you thinking about that? I'm like, I don't know. It just popped up.
Exactly. Yeah. Same with my wife too. I'll get out of the shower and be like, so I was thinking, and she was like, you need to stop thinking so much in the shower.
Oh, that's ridiculous. I can't stop thinking.
So, I'm going to ask you a few questions now, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So when I first came to you, because I remember one of the first times I sent you a text, I was like, so podcast? What were you thinking?
I was like, what kind of podcast are you thinking? Because like I said earlier, the most of the podcasts that I listen to or watch have been centered around a specific topic. I randomly got into watching League of Legends. Yeah. And so most of the podcasts I watch and listen to are centered around that, whether it's the different reads on the game or like different players who are playing. So I didn't know if you were being like, do you want to focus around gaming or industries, like pick a certain thing?
That's true. That was before the whole COVID thing. We were talking about starting a gaming company together.
I mean, I'm pretty sure we just put a pin in that for now, just because we can't do much.
COVID's still a thing. So yeah, that's why that's kind of on the hold. But yeah.
But yeah, no, as soon as you said, hey, do you want to do a podcast? I was like, for sure. Actually, it's a faux show in the back of my head. And I was just like, so what do we got to do? What do we need? And I internalized like 90% of those questions before I had texted you. I was like, okay, when are we doing it?
Right.
Where are we doing it?
I don't think either one of us thought our first podcast would be inside of a hotel room on downtown on the river.
Oh, I definitely didn't think that. I was hoping, I was like, well, maybe we could do it at my house to save me some money. But I think this view was well worth it.
Oh, it certainly was. We got here, the sun was setting like right over the river, over top of the battleship. And I was like, you know what? This makes some good content for the IG.
Yeah. Oh, man. It was so pretty. Yeah, I haven't been to this hotel in forever either, so it was a nice little something different than what we're used to seeing.
Yeah,
Same
made it
walls.
nice. Different whiskey for both of us, different kind of background, which is, I think, it kind of all worked out for the best, right? Because that's kind of what this podcast is about, is just doing something different, learning something different, and just getting out of your comfort zone and trying new things.
Yeah. Asking questions to try and further not just ourselves, but other people around us.
Yeah, I mean, that's how most of our conversations go anyway. They end up going down these like weird rabbit holes this way.
I remember I sent you a quote the other day about, like, if the people in your circle are all just sitting around and not asking you questions, then you're in the wrong circle.
Completely agree. And going back to Tim Ferriss's quote of scratching your own itch, when I was thinking, what's something I can do that'll force me to get out of my comfort zone and to force me to meet new people, this was definitely a good way to do it.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I didn't think we were going to be interviewing and chit-chatting with people. I thought it was just going to be more like the random TikToks of, if you drop a seashell in the middle of the ocean, you're the last person to touch it kind of thought experiments, but I'm excited for where we're going.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we'll have some time to kind of do some thought experiments and stuff on there too. And I liked kind of where we were going at first, but I think bringing some more people on, we have a banger lineup coming for you guys too. I have the next month already completely booked out. People just begging to be on and super excited to get on. I think everyone's going to enjoy listening to that. People from all walks of life doing different things. There's even people that I barely know that I've asked to come on the podcast just to literally have that true meeting someone at the bar while having a drink experience.
Oh, and that'll be exciting because, I mean, most of the people I've never heard of. Just because we run in such different circles. Mm-hmm. It's a true Venn diagram. Like the group of people I know is typically not the people so it'll truly be meeting new people for me, and then when my people come in, you'll be asking.
Absolutely,
it'll be nice to ask those questions.
I think that'll be good too. I mean, that's kind of what the world needs right now, right? Is just to be able to get outside your comfort zone and talk to people that you may not agree with, people you may not usually run the same circles with, and learn from them. There's always something you can learn. That was one of the things going through the career that I had. There was people that I've met that others absolutely hated, and I was able to learn from those guys. And I think that's the most important part, learning from the people that you don't necessarily align with. And so I look forward to finding people that either if you bring them in, or I plan on bringing people in that I have no clue who the hell they are or what they're going to say. So we're going to disagree a lot on things I foresee in the future. But I think that's something that we enjoy. That's something we like to learn from. And I think people would think we're the few that can respect and have a civil conversation with people. But I think we're actually in the majority with that one.
Yeah, I feel like there are more people who would like to sit down and learn from just all different experiences than people understand, especially because I feel like nowadays you see everything on social media or online, and it's really just a small minority of what is actually going on in the world. And we like to bring some of that minority and kind of expand the knowledge of everybody.
Completely agree with that. That's where the wisdom comes from, right? Yeah. Not just drinking the whiskey all the time. And by the time you get to our third and fourth episode here, you might be a little bit more of the whiskey than wisdom, but we'll see.
I mean, I love a good whiskey, but I do love learning stuff.
I'm quite excited to see where this goes, and it looks like we're coming up here on 20 minutes, which I didn't want this first episode to be too long, but just kind of introduction of kind of who we are, what we plan on getting out of this, and whatnot. And actually, that reminds me of one last question I want to ask you, Chris.
All right, shoot.
So when I brought this up and you were thinking about it and you were ready to get involved, what was the one thing that you wanted to get out of this more than anything?
Oh, that's a good one. I think it'd be another perspective. Just in general. I mean, growing up, I'm that kid who's lived here in Wilmington forever.
Yeah.
And so my perspective is living in this town for the most part, minus the few times I left and did whatever. But I think getting a perspective of an outside person's point of view, whereas you grew up in PA and you moved down here, or meeting somebody who lived in Raleigh or Charlotte, or even I'd love to interview somebody from LA or the Midwest.
Oh yeah.
And just picking their brain as to what they think is different, or what their perspective on life is. Because if I can see their perspective, then I'm like, okay, well, I can learn from that. I'm like, why do you think that way? Maybe I'll change my point of view, which I think is always a good thing. Is no one should ever just be stagnant in their thought process.
Agreed.
And that was one of the biggest things. Is I love learning new things all the time, which is why I've changed my position in retail so many times, because I'm always learning new stuff. But I think it was just getting another perspective on everything.
I'm actually glad you said that. I had no clue what you're going to answer to, but that's kind of a good segue into what our first guest is going to be.
Oh, I actually don't even know who this is, so I'm excited to figure out. So who are you bringing on?
Yeah, so our very first guest is actually going to be Thaddeus Brown. He's the owner of a pressure washing company here in Wilmington. Oh. And the reason why it sprung such a chord with what you just said is he grew up from not necessarily the richest part of New York. However, he did pressure washing and all different kinds of odd jobs up there too for the richest part of New York.
So wait, when you say New York, are you talking about
yeah, so you know the have and have nots of New York City. So yes. Literally being part of that and then doing work for the most wealthy people there. I had just a brief moment to talk to him, which is why I'm super excited to bring him on to actually have a full conversation.
Oh, for sure.
But just hearing this perspective that he had from where he was there to the people that he met and what the work he did up there and what he does now and how that kind of molded and created who he is now is what I'm excited about.
That'll be interesting. I mean, yeah, as soon as you said New York, me being a semi-cultured person, I was like, do you mean
upstate? Up in Buffalo?
Yeah, I'm excited to ask him the silliest question, which is going to be, what do you consider upstate? How far out of the city is upstate for you?
That is the question, because most people these days just as long as you're outside the city, you're upstate.
Yeah. I know. It has nothing to do with business or anything. But I always wonder that question because I got friends from Buffalo and I'm like, what is that? Where is that related to New York City? But that'll be kind of cool learning what he's done running around the boroughs.
Oh,
and
yeah.
How he's brought that knowledge and that mindset down here and what it's done for him.
I'm looking forward to it. And before more of the whiskey gets to us and we start going down more of these rabbit holes, I think it's about to wrap this up.
Oh, that'll be awesome. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys next week on this amazing new podcast we got coming up.
I hope you all enjoyed our first episode, learned a little bit about both of us. The best way to help us out, if you enjoyed the podcast, give us a review on whichever of your favorite podcasting stations you are listening on. Subscribe. Tell all of your friends about us. That's really the way that we're looking to spread this. We're not trying to get rich off of a podcast. We're just trying to spread some good whiskey and good wisdom to y'all. Have a good night.
We'll see you
next week.